In 2025, the Iranian rial hit a historic record: 1,750,000 rials for a single dollar, the least valuable currency on the planet. More than half of all Iranians suffer some level of malnutrition, and every single day the electricity cuts out for 3 to 4 hours across the entire country. Now, here's the number that doesn't add up. Iran has the third largest oil reserves in the world, 209 billion barrels underground, and the second largest natural gas reserves, behind only Russia. On paper, it should be one of the richest countries on Earth.
How do you destroy a country that has a fortune buried under its feet? Not with a war, not with a natural disaster guerrilla. You do it with two opposite strategies that make exactly the same mistake: the trap of infinite abundance.
Because this isn't the story of a poor country that never had a chance. This is the story of a country that had all the chances, twice, and burned them in two symmetrically opposite ways. And to understand how, you have to go back to the moment Iran discovered it had a treasure underground, and the day that treasure was stolen. In 1908, a British engineer named William Knox Darcy strikes oil in Masjid Suleiman, the first major oil field in the entire Middle East. And what happens next is a pattern that will repeat over and over in this story. Someone discovers Iran's wealth, and someone who isn't Iranian takes it. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company is born, what we know today as BP, and for the next 4 decades, this British company keeps 84% of the profits from Iranian oil. Iran gets 16%, and in practice, much less. Until in 1951, a prime minister shows up and says enough. Mohammad Mossadegh, a hugely popular politician, does something nobody dares to do at that time. He nationalizes all of Iran's oil. In one stroke, he kicks out the British and says, "This is ours." And for a moment, the briefest of moments, it looks like Iran is finally going to take control of its own wealth.
And this is where the real game begins. Because when a small country says no to an empire, the empire doesn't go home and cry.
Britain convinces the United States that Mossadegh is a threat. This is the middle of the Cold War, and any nationalization sounds like communism. And in August 1953, the CIA and MI6 execute Operation Ajax, a covert coup that overthrows Mossadegh and puts the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, back in power. The only Iranian leader who tried to give Iranians control of their own oil ends up under house arrest until his death. And the Shah, who owes his throne to Washington and London, is left with a debt he's going to repay in full. Total alignment with the West and generous oil contracts for his rescuers. But here's where it gets interesting. Because the Shah is not a puppet without ambition. He has a plan, an obsessive plan, and, in his mind, a brilliant one. In 1963, he launches what he calls the White Revolution, a massive reform program to turn Iran into a modern powerhouse in record time. Land reform that distributes land to 2.5 million families. Voting rights for women, unthinkable in the Middle East in the 60s. A program that sends thousands of young people to villages to teach peasants to read and write. Instead of doing military service, they went to teach. Industrialization at full speed. Universities, hospitals, and roads everywhere. And it works. GDP grows at 9.8% annually, one of the fastest rates in the world. Iran goes from being the 29th largest economy on the planet to the 18th in just 15 years. An Iranian who in 1963 could barely earn enough to eat, 15 years later has a car, a television, and his kids are going to university. Per capita income multiplied by 12. Tehran transforms into what they call the Paris of the Middle East. Movie theaters premiering the same films as Hollywood on the same day. Parisian haute couture boutiques on every corner. Nightclubs with international artists. Caspian caviar served on silver platters. If you landed in Tehran in the early 70s, you could have mistaken it for any European capital. And then 1973 arrives, and the money turns into an avalanche. The oil crisis quadruples the price of crude overnight, and suddenly Iran has more money than it can spend. And what does the Shah do with all that money? Buy weapons. Military purchases from the United States jump from $500 million in 1972 to $4.3 billion in just 2 years, multiplied by 8. He buys 80 F-14 fighter jets in one go for $2 billion. Planes so advanced, he needs 25,000 American technicians just to maintain them. His brother-in-law, the head of the Air Force, pockets millions in commissions, and lower-level officials line up to take their cut.
See what's happening? He has all the money in the world, but he doesn't have a system to turn that money into a country. He's buying modernity like someone buying an expensive suit trudge, but underneath, he's still the same.
Because while Tehran shines with its neon lights, the Shah has destroyed something that doesn't show up in GDP statistics: the social fabric that holds a country together. The land reform displaced millions of peasants to the cities, where they found no work, creating a belt of misery around Tehran that grew every year. The bazaris, the traditional merchants who had been Iran's economic backbone for centuries, watch as cheap imports and big Western corporations crush them. And the Shia clergy, the religious leaders who for centuries had been the judges, the teachers, and the ones who distributed charity in every village, suddenly find themselves powerless, because the Shah is building a country where religion no longer rules, and everything is moving too fast for a society that hasn't had time to adapt. And there's the fatal trap. The Shah didn't modernize Iran. He bought the facade of modernity with petrodollars, without building the social systems to sustain it. When the economy starts cooling in 1977, the alliance between ruined bazaris, humiliated clergy, and millions of young people with no future is already unstoppable. Business owners, wealthy families, and anyone with a foreign bank account starts pulling money out of Iran. Between $30 and $40 billion fleeing in suitcases, wire transfers, and Swiss accounts. And the man who wanted to turn Iran into Japan in 20 years discovers his project had a fatal design flaw. He built the entire building on a single pillar: oil. And without the cement that holds the bricks together, the consent of the people living inside. And when that consent breaks, it breaks with the force of 40 years of accumulated resentment. In January 1979, millions of Iranians flood the streets. Bazaris, students, workers, religious leaders, intellectuals, all united by one thing: getting rid of the Shah. And the Shah tries to hold on. He declares martial law, promises reforms, begs his generals to control the protests. But when your own soldiers refuse to fire on the people, the game is over. On January 16th, he boards a plane and leaves Iran forever. 2 weeks later, on February 1st, another plane lands in Tehran. This one from Air France, carrying a passenger who has spent 15 years in exile in Paris. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a 77-year-old cleric who is everything the Shah was not. Austere where the Shah was extravagant. Religious where the Shah was Western. Of the people where the Shah was of the elite. And here comes the most fascinating part of this entire story, because the new regime inherits exactly the same wealth, the same oil, the same gas, the same refineries, the same wells. The fortune is still there, underground, untouched. The only thing that changes is who signs the checks.
And you know what's the most dangerous thing about a revolution? The new guys are so obsessed with not looking like the last one that nobody stops to think if they're about to make the same mistake in a different disguise.
Because the Ayatollahs are going to do the same thing as the Shah, burn the country's fortune, only this time not spending it on modernization, but on the exact opposite. Barely a year after the revolution, in September 1980, Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq, the neighboring country, invades Iran. He sees a country in chaos and thinks it's the perfect moment to grab the oil-rich regions in the south. And it starts a war that will last 8 years and cost $622 billion. That equals 9 full years of Iran's GDP burned in trenches and missiles, in a war that ends exactly where it started, without either side gaining a single kilometer. 500,000 dead, 8 years of trenches in the middle of the desert, a war with World War I tactics, but with 20th century missiles, and a shattered economy. But the war ends in 1988, and the reconstruction never comes. Because the regime discovers that oil has a much more attractive use than building hospitals, buying power in other countries.
The Shah used oil to buy the facade of a modern country. The Ayatollahs use it to buy the facade of an empire. Two different obsessions lacked. Both treat money as if it were infinite.
Iran starts funding a network of armed groups across the Middle East. Its army is destroyed, so instead of rebuilding it, they pay armies in other countries to fight for Iranian interests. Hezbollah controls southern Lebanon. The Houthis block maritime trade in the Red Sea. Iraqi militias guard the border with Saudi Arabia. $700 million a year just for Hezbollah in Lebanon. $100 million for Hamas in Palestine, plus the Houthis in Yemen and militias in Iraq. The total spending runs between $6 and $12 billion every year. Money that comes from oil, that never goes through an official budget, and that never reaches the Iranian who can't afford to buy meat. Meanwhile, inside the country, everything is falling apart. Iran starts developing nuclear weapons, and half the world responds with sanctions, which basically means they cut off your trade. They won't sell you technology. They won't buy your oil. Your banks are isolated from the financial system. The Revolutionary Guard, the Ayatollah's personal army, created because they didn't trust the Shah's military, finishes the war with millions of veterans and massive infrastructure. The Ayatollahs hand them the reconstruction contracts as a reward, and from there, they leap to controlling ports, construction, telecommunications, and oil. Today, they manage nearly a third of Iran's economy, but that money never reaches the streets. And inflation shoots up to 48%. Out of every 100 rials you had at the start of the year, by the end, you had 52 left. And that's if you have a job. Because youth unemployment in Iran is over 40%. And while Iran spends billions on missiles for other countries, 200 kilometers across the Persian Gulf, Dubai, which has less oil, has become one of the most prosperous cities on the planet because it did exactly the opposite. It invested every dollar in building something that would work without oil. And the result is the image we started with. A country with one of the greatest natural fortunes on the planet under its feet, where half the population doesn't eat well, the power goes out every day, and 1,750,000 rials aren't enough to buy a single dollar.
And this isn't just the story of Iran. It's a manual for what happens when you confuse having resources with having a plan. First lesson, having resources doesn't build anything right. It's systems that make resources count for something.
Iran had more oil than almost any country in the world, and the Shah believed that was enough to buy everything. But money without institutions, without fair distribution, without social consensus, is just gasoline waiting for a spark. Look at Norway. It has less oil than Iran, but it created a sovereign wealth fund, invested in education, and built institutions before spending. Today, it's one of the countries with the best quality of life in the world. Same resource, opposite system, opposite result.
If your business depends on a single resource, one big client, one star product, and you haven't built the system that multiplies it, you don't have a business. You have a house of cards. Second lesson, speed without consensus destroys foul, and spending without return on investment destroys just as fast.
The Shah reformed an entire country without consulting the people who lived in it, and when those people said enough, he lost everything in a year. The Ayatollahs spent in the opposite direction, not on modernizing, but on wars, missiles, and allies in other countries, but the failure was the same. The average Iranian didn't see a single rial. Two opposite strategies, same result, because neither one put the citizen at the center. And a project that doesn't include its own people has an expiration date, no matter how much money you pour into it.
So the next time you look at your project's numbers and think what you're missing is money, remember Iran. They had all the money in the world, twice. And the question they never asked themselves is the same one you should be asking right now. Are you building a system, or are you just spending?